You're standing on the bridge before dawn, when the light has not yet decided what shape the world will take. The windows hold only grey water pressed against a sky that refuses contrast. The sea moves beneath the hull with a slow, indifferent rhythm, steady enough to be trusted, empty enough to reveal nothing. The horizon exists, but only as a suggestion, a thin joining of tones waiting for light to gather behind it. Before the next hour settles into place, take a moment to subscribe, only if this kind of calm history feels familiar. And if you choose, let us know where you're listening from, or which quiet moment stayed with you as the sea moved past. You're listening to Echoes of War. The bridge is dim, though it is not yet night. Light filters through the glass in a thin, colorless way, as if the sky itself is withholding something. The sea moves beneath the hull with a slow, unremarkable rhythm. No waves break sharply. Nothing announces itself. The sound that dominates is not water, but machinery, a steady vibration carried up through steel, through boots, through bone. The commander stands where he always stands, not because it is written, but because the space has shaped him into this position over time. From here, the horizon is visible in fragments, interrupted by instruments, frames, and the geometry of the ship itself. The ocean is not a surface so much as a field, wide and indifferent, offering no confirmation of what it holds. You notice how little there is to see. No enemy, no signal, no movement that resolves into meaning. The war, at this moment, exists only as an expectation. It presses inward rather than outward. The eyes scan because they must, not because there is anything to find. The commander listens to reports that sound complete until they are finished, and then feel insufficient. Bearings, weather, speed. Each arrives, is acknowledged, and fades into a larger uncertainty that remains untouched. Information accumulates without clarifying. The sea accepts it all without response. Time passes in small increments that do not add up cleanly. Minutes stretch. The clock advances, but nothing else seems to follow. The convoy holds its shape somewhere beyond the bridge windows, unseen but assumed, like a thought that must be trusted because it cannot be verified. This is command before contact, responsibility without friction, authority exercised in stillness. The commander does not pace. There is nowhere to go. He does not rehearse decisions yet. There is nothing to decide. What exists instead is vigilance, not sharp, not dramatic, but sustained, like pressure held quietly against the chest. The body remains upright. The mind stays open, though it would prefer to close. Outside, the light shifts almost imperceptibly. The sea remains unchanged. Somewhere below, engines continue their work, unaware of why. Somewhere beyond the horizon, possibilities exist that do not announce themselves in advance. Nothing happens, and because nothing happens, everything must be watched. The bridge remains steady as the hours continue to pass. The light outside dulls further, thinning toward evening without ceremony. There is no clear moment when day gives way to night, only a gradual loss of contrast, a soft erasure of edges. Instruments grow easier to see as the sea becomes harder to read. The commander adjusts his stance slightly, not from discomfort, but from habit. Small movements keep time here. A glance toward the chart table. A hand resting briefly on the rail. These gestures do not change the situation, but they reaffirm presence, a way of staying anchored while everything else remains unresolved. You become aware of how much of command is directed inward. Orders are ready, but unused. Authority exists in reserve, like a door that must remain closed until it no longer can. The commander's task is not to act, but to remain prepared for action without knowing when it will be required. The convoy continues somewhere ahead and astern, ships separated by distance and darkness, bound together by spacing and trust rather than sight. Each vessel carries its own noise, its own light discipline, its own fragile envelope of safety. From the bridge, they are abstractions, positions on a chart, estimates of speed, yet their weight is felt all the same. Radio traffic comes and goes, clipped and careful. Nothing urgent, nothing reassuring. Each message confirms that the system is still intact, while offering no promise that it will remain so. Silence returns quickly, settling back into place like fog. This is how the Atlantic War announces itself, not with violence, but with endurance. Long before loss, before engagement, before memory takes shape, there is this prolonged holding. The war asks first for attention, then patience, and only much later for consequence. The bridge as a fixed point. The bridge settles into its night posture without instruction. Lamps are dimmed to the lowest workable glow. Reflections are managed carefully, so the glass does not betray the ship to the dark outside. The world beyond the windows becomes almost entirely abstract, a black plane interrupted only by the faintest variations in tone, where sky and sea meet without agreement. The commander remains at the center of this space, though the space itself does not acknowledge him. The bridge is a tool before it is a room. Every surface has been worn smooth by repetition, not by urgency. Hands have rested here during hours when nothing required them, when the only task was to stay available. Reports arrive in the same measured cadence as before. Course held. Speed unchanged. Weather steady, though cold presses more firmly into the steel than it did earlier. Each report is precise, contained, and ultimately incomplete. They do not contradict one another, but neither do they converge into clarity. You notice how command exists in layers. The visible layer is calm, controlled, almost empty. Beneath it lies calculation, distances estimated, fuel consumption quietly tracked, margins of error held in mind without being spoken. None of this resolves into action yet. It accumulates instead, like weight placed carefully on a scale that has not begun to tip. Time here does not flow forward so much as circulate. Watches change. Voices rotate. The instruments remain constant. The commander's awareness moves slowly across the bridge, touching each station without settling. He does not watch any one thing for long. Attention is distributed, parceled out in small, repeatable intervals. Outside, the convoy advances through darkness that offers no landmarks. Ships maintain their assigned distances by faith as much as by measurement. Lights are suppressed. Sound is controlled. Even the sea seems to move with restraint, its surface subdued, its presence felt more through motion than sight. This is the bridge as a fixed point, not a place of command decisions, but a place of sustained readiness. Nothing is being solved here. Nothing is concluding. The commander holds the situation open, resisting the impulse to narrow it prematurely. The war remains theoretical. Its presence is inferred, not confirmed. And so the night continues, carrying the ship forward through a field of possibilities that refuse to take shape. As the night deepens, the bridge does not grow quieter, it grows more contained. Sounds are fewer, but more noticeable. The low hum of engines seems closer now, as if the ship's interior has drawn inward around it. Even footsteps are measured, placed with care, so they do not carry farther than intended. The commander's gaze returns again and again to the same elements. The compass, the clock, the darkened windows. Each return is brief, almost cursory, yet deliberate. Nothing has changed since the last glance, but the act of looking maintains continuity. It keeps the system alive by acknowledging it. You sense how command resists emotion by design. There is no room here for anticipation to bloom into fear, or for calm to relax into ease. The bridge holds a narrow emotional range, enforced not by discipline alone, but by necessity. Any widening would introduce distraction, and distraction has weight. Messages arrive that require acknowledgement rather than response. A course confirmation. A routine signal passed along the line. Each is received, marked, and allowed to fade. The convoy's existence is reaffirmed through these exchanges, even as its physical reality remains unseen. The ships are present because they are reported to be present. The commander stands with the awareness that responsibility here is asymmetrical. He carries the weight of decisions that may never be enacted, and of consequences that may never be visible. If something happens elsewhere in the formation, he may learn of it only after it has already concluded. Authority reaches farther than perception. Outside, the sea continues its indifferent motion. The darkness does not conceal movement so much as absorb it. There is no sense of approach, no warning carried on the air. Whatever exists beyond the visible range will remain there until it chooses not to. The bridge holds steady. The night does not resolve. And within this sustained stillness, command persists, not as action, but as presence maintained against uncertainty. Charts that do not promise. The chart table occupies its place without ceremony, its surface angled just enough to invite attention without demanding it. Paper lies beneath glass, lines and symbols arranged into something that resembles certainty. Routes are drawn. Positions are marked. The sea is reduced to measurements that fit within the margins. The commander returns to the table as he always does, not urgently, not often, but repeatedly. Each visit confirms what is already known. The convoy is where it should be. The spacing remains acceptable. The projected track continues forward through empty blue and gray. Nothing on the chart resists this movement. You notice how the chart offers reassurance without protection. It shows where the ship intends to be, not what may be encountered along the way. Depths are noted, distances calculated, hazards fixed in place as if they will remain obedient to ink. The unknown, by contrast, has no symbol. The commander studies the markings with care that borders on ritual, not because the chart will change, but because the act of consulting it reinforces order. It allows the war to be framed, however briefly, as something navigable. Lines drawn here imply control, even as experience teaches otherwise. Time presses quietly against the glass. Each position recorded becomes obsolete the moment it is written. The ship moves. The convoy shifts. What was accurate becomes historical without announcement. The commander is aware of this, yet continues the process. Command requires records even when permanence is impossible. Beyond the table, the bridge resumes its muted rhythm. Instruments glow faintly. Voices remain low. The outside world stays withheld. The chart becomes a private conversation between intention and reality, one that never quite resolves. This is navigation without assurance, progress without visibility. The war translated into symbols that do not promise safety, only continuity. The commander remains at the chart table longer than necessary, though necessity itself is difficult to define here. The lines remain unchanged. The measurements hold. And yet, the longer he stands, the more apparent it becomes that the chart is not a guide so much as a companion, something solid to return to when the rest of the war refuses shape. A faint vibration travels through the glass, carried up from the engines below. It does not disturb the markings, but it reminds the hand resting near the edge that the ship is never still. Even now, as the convoy advances through darkness, every plotted certainty lags behind reality by a small, unavoidable distance. You sense the quiet tension in this gap. Command lives there, between what is recorded and what is happening, between intention and outcome. The commander understands that no adjustment made here can account for what remains unseen. Still, the process continues, because without it the war would exist only as rumor and fear. Messages filter in, each one offering another fragment of location, another assurance that the formation holds. Bearings are exchanged. Speeds confirmed. Each report fits neatly into the chart's logic, even as the space beyond the margins remains untouched. The convoy persists as an idea long before it can be confirmed as a sight. The commander straightens a pencil that has not moved. The gesture is small, almost unconscious. Order is maintained where it can be, even if it cannot be extended outward. The chart, for all its limitations, provides a surface on which responsibility can briefly rest. Outside the bridge, the night deepens further. There are no stars visible now. Cloud and darkness merge, erasing even the faint references that once existed. The sea offers no reflection, no signal of distance traveled or danger avoided. Movement continues without acknowledgement. The commander steps back from the table. The chart remains behind, intact and silent. It will be consulted again soon, though it will have nothing new to offer. And so the bridge resumes its watch, carrying forward through a war that cannot be fully drawn. Reports without weight. Reports arrive with a regularity that feels almost reassuring. They move across the bridge in measured phrases, stripped of excess language, shaped to fit within established forms. Each one carries information, but very little substance. They describe conditions without consequence. The commander receives them without visible reaction. Bearings are noted, weather acknowledged, engine status confirmed. The words pass through the space and settle briefly before dissolving into the larger background of awareness that never fully clears. Nothing in them demands immediate change. You notice how reports function less as messages than as signals of continuity. They confirm that the system is still speaking to itself, that nothing has broken the chain. Their value lies not in what they reveal, but in the fact that they continue to arrive at all. Some reports are delayed, arriving slightly out of sequence. Others repeat what has already been said. None of this is unusual. The commander does not correct the rhythm. Precision here is relative. What matters is that the flow persists, imperfect but unbroken. Time stretches again. Watches rotate. The same voices return, altered only by fatigue and quiet concentration. The bridge absorbs these exchanges without emphasis. Information accumulates without gravity, layering gently rather than pressing downward. Outside, the convoy moves as it has all night, unseen and assumed. The sea does not respond to the reports. The darkness offers no acknowledgement. And so the commander remains, receiving words that carry no immediate weight, holding them anyway, because one day, without warning, they will. As the night progresses, the reports continue to arrive, each one measured against the last. Their tone remains unchanged, though the hour grows later and the air inside the bridge cools slightly. Nothing in the language reflects the passage of time. Words here are designed to resist it. The commander listens with an attention that never sharpens into urgency. His responses are brief, almost identical from one exchange to the next. Acknowledgement is given, not elaboration. The reports are absorbed, filed mentally, and allowed to recede. There is no visible accumulation, though the mind holds them all. You sense how command depends on this restraint. To react to every fragment would fracture focus. Instead, the bridge maintains a narrow channel of relevance, allowing only what cannot be ignored to rise above the surface. Everything else settles quietly beneath it. Occasionally, a report pauses before completion, a hesitation, a breath taken before the final words. Nothing follows. The moment passes. The system closes over the gap without comment. Even interruptions are absorbed into routine here. Outside, the darkness remains complete. No lights betray the convoy's movement. No sound carries far enough to suggest proximity or danger. The war continues to exist only as a set of probabilities, suspended somewhere beyond the reach of language. The commander remains where he is, receiving information that does not yet alter the night. Each report is another confirmation that the waiting continues, and that command, for now, consists of holding still while everything else moves unseen. Authority held in reserve. The bridge remains unchanged in its arrangement, yet the feeling within it shifts subtly as the night advances. Authority here is not expressed through motion or command, but through readiness that never quite declares itself. Orders exist fully formed, yet remain unspoken, held back by the absence of necessity. The commander's presence anchors this restraint. He does not rehearse possibilities aloud. He does not test responses. Preparation happens quietly, internally, shaped by habit rather than urgency. The bridge is aware of this posture and mirrors it. No one moves faster than required. No one speaks more than necessary. You notice how authority is maintained through stillness. The commander's silence does not invite challenge, nor does it demand obedience. It simply establishes a boundary, a sense that action will come only when it must, and not before. The ship continues forward under this held tension. Time passes again without marker. The clock advances, but no threshold is crossed. Night remains night. The sea remains unseen. Authority rests where it has all along, unused but intact, like a tool set carefully aside within reach. This is command as suspension, power measured not by execution, but by restraint. The war presses lightly, testing whether it will be answered, and for now, the answer is patience. As the hours continue, the bridge begins to register the quiet strain of sustained readiness, not as tension, but as a subtle narrowing of attention. Movements are smaller now. Speech is more economical. Authority remains intact, yet it must be carried with greater care, as if it has weight that increases the longer it is held and used. The commander senses this shift without naming it. He adjusts nothing outwardly. The posture remains the same. But internally, awareness tightens around fewer variables, conserving clarity where it can. Command does not expand to meet uncertainty. It contracts, preserving what matters most. You observe how this restraint governs the entire space. No one tests limits. No unnecessary confirmation is sought. The bridge functions as a closed circuit, energy cycling quietly rather than dispersing. Even uncertainty is contained, folded neatly into procedure. Outside, the sea continues its unbroken movement. Somewhere ahead, the convoy maintains its spacing, each ship bound by the same unspoken discipline. Authority extends across the dark not through visibility, but through assumption, through the shared agreement that the system will hold unless proven otherwise. The commander remains still, authority resting unused but present. The night does not resolve. And within that unresolved space, command persists, not as action taken, but as action withheld, waiting for the moment when restraint will no longer be enough. The shape of waiting. Waiting on the bridge does not feel like absence. It has weight, texture, a shape that becomes familiar over time. The commander recognizes it not as a gap between events, but as the dominant state itself, something that must be managed as carefully as fuel or distance. The hours stretch without resistance. There is no sense of anticipation sharpening toward release. Instead, waiting settles into routine, folding itself into the structure of command. The body adjusts to it. Muscles remain alert without tension. The mind holds possibilities at a distance, close enough to be retrieved, far enough to avoid intrusion. You become aware of how waiting governs perception. Sounds seem amplified, not because they are louder, but because there are fewer of them. A change in engine pitch. A muted signal tone. Each draws attention briefly before being weighed and set aside. Nothing accumulates into urgency. The commander watches the bridge itself as much as the sea beyond it. Faces remain composed. Movements stay deliberate. The system functions as it should under prolonged stillness. Waiting, here, is not passive. It is an active condition, sustained through discipline and repetition. Outside, the darkness persists, unbroken and unrevealing. The convoy advances through it without incident, each mile passing unnoticed. Progress occurs without acknowledgement. Time continues to move, though it leaves no trace behind. This is the shape of waiting, extended, continuous, and unresolved. It does not lead anywhere yet. It simply endures. As the waiting continues, it begins to lose its edges. Hours pass without clear division, merging into a single, elongated stretch of awareness. The commander no longer measures time by the clock alone, but by the repetition of checks, the rotation of watches, the quiet return of familiar sensations. The bridge settles deeper into this state. No one remarks on it. There is nothing to remark upon. Waiting has become the environment itself, shaping behavior without drawing attention to its influence. Even vigilance adjusts, smoothing into a sustained, manageable form. You sense how command adapts here. Instead of resisting the stillness, it accommodates it, redistributing effort so it can be maintained indefinitely. Attention is conserved. Imagination is restrained. The commander allows nothing speculative to linger long enough to distort judgment. Outside, the sea remains unresponsive. There is no signal to mark the passage of distance or safety gained. The convoy exists only through confirmation and trust, not through sight. Each ship carries its own waiting, synchronized loosely with the others by procedure and expectation. The commander stands within this extended quiet, aware that waiting is not neutral. It wears down certainty slowly, imperceptibly, and yet, for now, it holds. The system remains intact. The night continues. Waiting endures, unbroken and unresolved. The weight of continuity. The bridge carries the night forward without comment. There is no sense of having arrived anywhere, nor of having left something behind. Continuity is maintained not through awareness of distance traveled, but through the unbroken persistence of procedure. The commander understands this instinctively. Progress here is defined by survival of the system, not by milestones reached. The hours that follow feel indistinct from those that came before. The same checks are completed, the same confirmations exchanged. Nothing interrupts the pattern strongly enough to mark time. Continuity becomes its own burden, a requirement to keep everything exactly as it is, despite the quiet pressure to change something, anything, simply to feel movement. You notice how the bridge resists that impulse. Routine holds firm, not because it promises safety, but because deviation introduces uncertainty of a different kind. The commander remains committed to sameness, aware that consistency itself is a defensive measure. Every repeated action reinforces the structure that keeps the convoy coherent. The body responds to this sustained continuity in subtle ways. Muscles remain engaged without tension. Breathing settles into a steady rhythm that mirrors the engines below. Fatigue does not yet announce itself, but it lingers at the edges, waiting for permission to enter. For now, it is kept at bay by familiarity. Outside, the sea remains unseen and unresponsive. There is no feedback to suggest that continuity matters, no acknowledgement that the convoy's careful persistence has any effect beyond itself. The water carries the ships forward without distinction, indifferent to formation or intent. The commander stands within this ongoing present, aware that continuity is not neutral. It demands attention, discipline, and restraint. To maintain it requires effort, even when nothing appears to threaten it. And so the night continues, unbroken, carrying command forward through a war that has not yet revealed its shape. As continuity stretches onward, it begins to press inward. Not sharply, not enough to disrupt function, but with a steady insistence that cannot be ignored. The bridge absorbs this pressure quietly. No one remarks on it. There is no language for it that would not sound exaggerated, and so it remains unspoken. The commander feels the effort required to keep everything aligned. Not effort as strain, but as maintenance, the constant low-level attention needed to prevent drift. Small discrepancies are corrected before they become visible. Slight irregularities in timing are smoothed out. Continuity is preserved through countless minor adjustments that never rise to the level of decision. You observe how sameness acquires texture over time. What once felt neutral now carries subtle variation. A pause lingers half a second longer than before. A report arrives fractionally late. These differences are noted without concern, absorbed into the larger rhythm rather than allowed to interrupt it. The system remains intact, even as it quietly flexes. The night deepens again, though it feels as though it has been deep for some time. There is no longer a clear memory of when darkness fully settled. It simply exists now as a constant condition, wrapping the bridge in a uniform absence of reference. Light inside the ship grows warmer by contrast, contained and deliberate. Outside, the convoy continues its measured advance. Ships maintain spacing through trust in instruments and procedure, not through sight. Continuity extends outward into the darkness, linking vessels that cannot see one another but must behave as though they do. The commander carries this connection mentally, holding the formation together through awareness rather than control. Fatigue remains restrained, present but not yet dominant. It manifests as a narrowing of focus, a gentle insistence to simplify. The commander allows this only to a point. Attention is redistributed carefully, ensuring that nothing essential slips beyond reach. Continuity must be protected, even from the body's quiet request to ease. The bridge holds. The convoy moves. The war remains suspended in possibility rather than action. And within this sustained, deliberate sameness, command persists, not because something is happening, but because nothing is allowed to fail. Routine as a shield. Routine settles over the bridge like a layer of insulation. It does not block out the cold entirely, but it dulls its sharpest edges. The commander relies on this without thinking about it directly. Routine is not a choice anymore. It is the shape the night has taken. Each action follows another with quiet inevitability. Checks are completed in the same order. Reports arrive, are acknowledged, and move on. Nothing new is introduced. Nothing is removed. The system sustains itself through repetition, each cycle reinforcing the last. You notice how routine absorbs uncertainty. Unknowns still exist, but they are held at a distance, filtered through procedure before they can intrude. The commander does not imagine what lies beyond the darkness. He does not speculate about contact or loss. Those possibilities remain abstract, managed indirectly by adherence to what is known and repeatable. The bridge reflects this discipline. Movements are economical. Speech is sparse. Even posture aligns with expectation, shaped by long familiarity rather than conscious effort. Routine here is not mechanical. It is protective. It keeps attention from scattering, keeps fear from gaining texture. Outside, the sea offers no interruption. Darkness remains complete, unbroken by stars or reflection. The convoy advances through it as it has all along, held together by shared adherence to pattern rather than by sight. Each ship mirrors the others in behavior, even as they remain physically isolated. The commander stands within this pattern, aware that routine is doing more than preserving order. It is preserving capacity. By reducing variation, it conserves energy for moments that have not yet arrived. The night continues, shaped and softened by repetition, while the war remains distant, waiting its turn. As routine continues to assert itself, its presence becomes less visible and more pervasive. It no longer feels like a set of actions being performed, but like an environment that surrounds the bridge entirely. The commander moves within it without resistance, guided by familiarity rather than conscious intention. Small deviations occur, but they are absorbed quickly. A report arrives with a different cadence. A check takes slightly longer than usual. None of this disrupts the overall pattern. Routine flexes just enough to accommodate variation without losing its shape. The shield holds. You sense how this repetition alters perception. The bridge feels smaller now, not because it has changed, but because attention no longer needs to roam. The commander's awareness settles into a narrow, efficient range, covering only what must be covered. Everything else is excluded by design. Outside, the sea remains indifferent. Darkness presses against the windows without texture or detail. The convoy continues its quiet progression, each ship maintaining its place through adherence to shared expectation rather than direct contact. Routine extends beyond the bridge, linking vessels through synchronized behavior. The commander understands, without articulating it, that routine will eventually fail. It cannot prevent contact, only delay its disruption. But for now, it serves its purpose. It absorbs uncertainty, contains fatigue, and keeps command intact through prolonged stillness. The night stretches on, shaped by repetition rather than event. Routine remains in place, a thin but persistent barrier between order and the chaos that has not yet arrived. Repetition without relief. The bridge returns to its routines without acknowledging that anything has changed. The same checks are completed, the same confirmations exchanged. On the surface, repetition continues to function as it always has, a stabilizing force, a structure that carries command forward through uncertainty. But repetition no longer offers rest. The commander senses this shift in small ways. Actions that once settled the mind now require attention to complete. Familiar sequences demand conscious recall rather than instinct. The order of operations has not changed, yet it feels less forgiving, as though it now expects accuracy rather than merely presence. You notice how repetition begins to assert itself as labor. Each return to the same instruments, the same reports, the same phrases carries a faint resistance. Not enough to disrupt function, but enough to be felt. The bridge remains efficient, yet the effort required to maintain that efficiency has increased. The commander does not alter procedure in response. That would invite unnecessary complexity. Instead, he tightens adherence to routine, trusting its structure even as its comfort recedes. Repetition becomes something to be sustained rather than relied upon. Time passes again without marker. Watches rotate. Voices change. The content of reports remains unchanged, but the act of receiving them feels heavier now, as if each one adds to a cumulative weight rather than dispersing into the background. Information no longer dissolves as easily. It lingers briefly before being set aside. Outside, the sea remains indifferent. Darkness holds without variation. The convoy continues its advance through space that offers no reference points, no sense of progression beyond movement itself. Repetition extends outward into this darkness, linking ships through shared behavior rather than shared experience. The commander remains steady within this growing effort. He recognizes that repetition has entered a new phase, no longer a shield, not yet a burden, but something in between. It must now be carried deliberately, maintained through attention rather than habit. The bridge holds. The system functions. And within this quiet shift, repetition continues, unchanged in form, altered in cost. As repetition continues, its altered cost becomes more apparent in the smallest details. A hand hesitates briefly before confirming a setting. A report is acknowledged half a beat later than it would have been earlier in the night. These are not mistakes. They are signs of effort, evidence that routine is no longer automatic. The commander notices these signs without reacting to them. He does not correct the rhythm openly. To do so would draw attention to a condition that must remain contained. Instead, he adjusts internally, lending deliberate focus to steps that once required none. Repetition becomes a series of conscious renewals. You observe how this changes the bridge's atmosphere. Nothing looks different. The lamp remains shaded. The instruments glow steadily. Voices stay low. Yet the space feels slightly narrower, as though attention has tightened around the essentials, leaving less room for drift. The convoy persists beyond the glass, unseen but assumed. Each ship maintains its assigned distance through measurement and trust. Repetition binds them together. The same speed held, the same spacing preserved, the same discipline enforced without question. It is collective endurance expressed through sameness. Outside, the sea remains unresponsive. Darkness offers no feedback, no assurance that repetition is accomplishing anything beyond movement itself. The ship advances, the engines continue their steady pulse, and the water absorbs all evidence of passage. The commander remains at his fixed point, repeating what must be repeated even as it ceases to soothe. Routine still protects the system from disorder, but it no longer protects the mind from effort. Repetition now demands attention as payment, and the payment must be made quietly, again and again. Nothing breaks. Nothing resolves. Repetition continues, intact and necessary, carrying command forward through a night that does not change, even as those within it do. Repetition that narrows. Repetition continues to hold the bridge together, but its effect has changed again. What once spread attention evenly across the space now draws it inward, concentrating awareness around fewer points. The commander senses this narrowing without resistance. It feels practical, even necessary, a way of preserving clarity by letting the margins fall away. Certain instruments receive more frequent glances now, while others are trusted to remain stable without confirmation. The order of checks remains the same, but the emphasis shifts subtly, guided by experience rather than instruction. Repetition no longer reinforces the whole system equally. It reinforces what must not fail. You notice how this contraction alters the rhythm of the bridge. Movements are still deliberate, but they trace shorter paths. Conversations end sooner, having delivered only what is required. The space feels quieter, though no sound has been removed. Attention has simply withdrawn from anything that does not demand it. The commander allows this narrowing, aware of its risks. Focus preserved too tightly can miss what arrives from the edges. And yet, to resist the contraction would invite fatigue to spread unchecked. Repetition now serves as a filter, conserving effort by limiting scope. Outside, the convoy advances through darkness that offers no variation to reset perception. Distance accumulates without reference. The sea remains unchanged, absorbing movement without distinction. In this uniform environment, narrowing becomes adaptive rather than dangerous. The commander stands within this reduced field of awareness, repeating what must be repeated, ignoring what can be safely ignored. Repetition does not fail. It adapts. But in adapting, it reshapes the way the war is held, not broadly, not expansively, but with careful, deliberate restraint. The bridge remains intact. The system continues to function. And within this tightening circle of attention, repetition carries on. No longer a shield, no longer a comfort, but a narrowing path that command must now follow. As repetition continues in its narrowed form, it begins to shape judgment as much as attention. Decisions feel simpler now, not because the situation has clarified, but because fewer possibilities are being entertained at once. The commander recognizes this as both relief and risk, and holds it carefully between the two. Checks are still completed, but some are confirmed by memory rather than measurement. A setting that has held for hours is trusted to continue holding. A pattern that has repeated without deviation is allowed to stand without re-examination. This is not neglect. It is conservation, practiced quietly and without announcement. You sense how this narrowing spreads through the bridge. Others adjust in the same way, without instruction, guided by the same internal economy. The system remains coordinated not because everyone sees everything, but because everyone sees enough. Redundancy thins, but coherence remains. Outside, the sea offers no interruption. Darkness persists, uniform and unrevealing. The convoy continues its steady advance, bound together by procedures that no longer feel expansive, only sufficient. Repetition extends outward as a shared constraint, linking ships through mutual limitation rather than mutual assurance. The commander remains attentive to the edges of this narrowed field. He returns briefly to what has been set aside, a quick glance, a short confirmation, just enough to ensure nothing essential has been lost. These returns are deliberate and fleeting, designed to preserve balance rather than restore breadth. Repetition now demands judgment, not comfort. It asks what can be trusted, what must be checked, and what can be released without consequence. The answers shift subtly with time, guided by fatigue, experience, and the unchanging pressure of responsibility. The bridge holds within this contraction. The convoy advances. And within this narrowed repetition, command persists, not weakened by focus, but reshaped by it, carrying forward through a night that continues to ask less for vigilance and more for endurance. Attention narrowed. As the night continues, attention begins to draw inward, not sharply, not with alarm, but with a gradual economy that feels almost deliberate. The bridge remains functional, unchanged in layout and procedure, yet awareness no longer spreads evenly across it. Certain elements are held closer now, while others recede without consequence. The commander notices this shift without naming it. Some instruments are checked more often than others. Certain sounds carry farther. The mind selects what it can hold and lets the rest pass through unexamined. This narrowing is not failure. It is adaptation, shaped by hours of sustained vigilance. You observe how attention becomes selective rather than expansive. The commander does not try to know everything at once. He knows what must be known now, and trusts the rest to remain stable until proven otherwise. This trust is not blind. It is calculated, refined through repetition. The bridge mirrors this contraction. Movements are precise, contained within familiar paths. Conversations shorten further, reduced to essential confirmations. There is no sense of loss in this simplification, only efficiency. The system sheds excess awareness to preserve clarity where it matters most. Outside, the darkness remains absolute. No signal pierces it. No movement announces itself. The sea continues its steady passage beneath the hull, indifferent to the commander's quiet recalibration. The convoy advances as it has all night, held together by the same narrowing of focus across many bridges, many watches. Fatigue has not yet taken hold fully, but its outline is visible now. It waits at the edge of attention, encouraging further simplification. The commander allows this only in measured increments. Attention narrows, but it does not collapse. The night holds. The bridge adapts. And within this refined field of awareness, command continues, sustained not by expansion, but by careful, deliberate reduction. As attention settles into its narrowed state, the bridge takes on a different quality. It feels quieter, though no sounds have been removed. What has changed is the way they are received. Each noise is evaluated quickly, placed into a category, and either retained or dismissed without lingering. The process happens almost beneath awareness. The commander trusts this adjustment, even as he monitors it. Narrowing attention is useful only if it remains reversible. He checks himself in small ways, returning briefly to instruments that no longer demand focus, confirming that what has been set aside remains stable. These returns are short, deliberate, just enough to ensure nothing essential has slipped away. You sense how this balancing act defines command at this hour. Too much attention, and fatigue accelerates. Too little, and risk goes unnoticed. The commander holds the line between them, guided by experience rather than calculation. There is no formula for this state, only recognition. Outside, the convoy continues its advance through darkness that feels increasingly uniform. Without variation, distance loses meaning. The sea offers no cues. Time becomes something felt internally rather than measured externally, marked by the rhythm of checks and the subtle drift of awareness. The bridge remains intact, though it now operates within a tighter frame. Routine persists, but with less redundancy. Certain confirmations are trusted without repetition. Others receive extra scrutiny. The system adjusts itself quietly, conserving energy without announcing the change. Fatigue edges closer, no longer distant but not yet dominant. It presses gently, suggesting further simplification. The commander acknowledges its presence without yielding to it. Attention stays narrow, but stable. Command continues within this reduced field, holding the convoy together through awareness that has learned how to endure. Fatigue that returns. Fatigue does not arrive as something new. It returns. The commander recognizes it immediately, not by sensation alone, but by familiarity. This is not the first time weariness has pressed against attention on the bridge, nor the sharpest. What distinguishes it now is persistence. It settles in without asking permission, carrying the quiet confidence of something that knows it will not be sent away. The body adapts before the mind does. Movements become more economical, less exploratory. The stance held at the rail shifts slightly, redistributing weight to conserve strength rather than maintain posture. Breathing slows, not from calm, but from efficiency. These changes are subtle, practiced, and unremarked. You notice how fatigue reshapes awareness without disrupting it. Attention still functions, but it no longer refreshes itself automatically. Each return to the instruments requires a small act of intention. Focus must be gathered, directed, and released, rather than allowed to flow. The effort remains manageable, but it is continuous. The bridge accommodates this condition without ceremony. Nothing is said. Procedures remain unchanged. Yet the space feels tighter again, as though it has learned to operate within narrower tolerances. Redundancy thins further. Confidence rests more heavily on habit than verification. Outside, the night persists with the same uniform indifference. Darkness offers no variation to break the cycle or reset perception. The sea continues to carry the convoy forward, its surface unchanged by the hours already endured. Fatigue, unrelieved by environment, deepens through repetition alone. The commander understands this phase well enough to respect it. Fatigue that returns does not threaten collapse. It threatens drift, the slow erosion of clarity through accumulation rather than shock. And so he remains attentive to its shape, adjusting not to remove it, but to carry it alongside responsibility. The bridge holds steady. The convoy advances. And within this familiar returning weariness, command continues, not surprised by fatigue, not undone by it, but required once again to make room for its presence. As fatigue settles back into the bridge, it reveals patterns the commander has learned to recognize over time. Not symptoms exactly, but tendencies, a preference for the familiar, a quiet resistance to reassessment, a subtle narrowing of what feels worth rechecking. None of this disrupts function. It alters the texture of it. The commander compensates without conscious calculation. He lingers slightly longer on certain readings, aware that attention now requires reinforcement. He allows other elements to pass with less scrutiny, trusting that stability, once proven, will persist. These adjustments are not written anywhere. They exist only in practice, refined through repetition and necessity. You sense how fatigue reshapes time itself. Moments stretch, not because they are empty, but because effort fills them. Each task completes cleanly, yet leaves behind a faint residue of exertion. The bridge moves forward through this accumulation without pause, carrying weariness the way it carries motion, steadily, without acknowledgement. Outside, the convoy remains intact, its presence confirmed through routine signals and measured spacing. No new information arrives to disturb the balance. Darkness continues to offer no relief, no contrast by which to gauge progress. The sea holds everything in the same muted register, encouraging sameness rather than change. The commander remains alert to the danger of overconfidence. Fatigue makes familiarity feel safe, and safety feel permanent. To counter this, he returns occasionally to what has been set aside, a quick verification, a brief reconsideration, not to reopen uncertainty, but to prevent it from closing entirely. This is fatigue managed through awareness rather than resistance. It does not demand rest. It demands discipline, the careful placement of attention, the deliberate pacing of thought, the refusal to let weariness decide what matters. The bridge holds to this discipline quietly, as it has before. The night continues. Fatigue remains. And within this returning, familiar strain, command persists, not by escaping weariness, but by accepting its presence and adjusting just enough to continue without loss of clarity. Fatigue that repeats. Fatigue does not progress in a straight line. It circles back on itself, revisiting the same thresholds with small differences each time. The commander feels this repetition not as escalation, but as return, a familiar weight settling again into the same places, testing whether anything has changed. The bridge absorbs this cycle quietly. Procedures remain stable, yet the effort required to sustain them fluctuates. Some moments pass with relative ease. Others demand careful attention, as though fatigue has shifted its pressure, pressing harder in places that once held firm. The system adjusts without comment. You notice how repetition of fatigue alters expectation. The commander no longer anticipates relief. He anticipates management. Each hour is approached not as something to be endured until it ends, but as a condition to be navigated while it persists. This orientation removes urgency, but it deepens concentration. The body responds accordingly. Movements are efficient, refined by necessity. The stance held at the rail is adjusted again, subtly, redistributing strain. Muscles remain engaged without tension. Energy is conserved wherever possible, not in preparation for rest, but to sustain clarity across repetition. Outside, the night remains unchanged. Darkness offers no cues to mark progress or renewal. The sea carries the convoy forward with the same indifference it has shown all along, absorbing distance without acknowledgement. In this uniform environment, fatigue's repetition becomes another constant, as reliable as routine. The commander remains attentive to the way this repetition shapes judgment. Choices feel heavier now, not because they are more complex, but because the effort required to evaluate them has increased. He responds by simplifying where simplification does not risk coherence, preserving energy for what cannot be deferred. Fatigue repeats. The bridge holds. And within this cyclical return of weariness, command continues, steady, deliberate, and increasingly shaped by the knowledge that endurance is not a single act, but a condition that must be sustained again and again. As fatigue continues its cycle, it begins to feel less like a condition that arrives and more like a background state that never fully leaves. The commander no longer distinguishes between moments of alertness and moments of strain. Instead, attention exists within a narrow, continuous band, sufficient but carefully guarded. The bridge reflects this equilibrium. Tasks are completed without variation in tone or pace, yet each one carries a quiet awareness of cost. The effort required to remain precise is constant now, and precision is maintained not through freshness, but through discipline reinforced by habit. You sense how fatigue reshapes confidence. Familiar systems feel dependable not because they are perfect, but because they have endured. The commander trusts what has held so far, aware that this trust is provisional. It must be tested lightly, revisited occasionally, never abandoned entirely. Outside, the convoy persists through darkness that no longer feels oppressive, only uniform. Distance accumulates without texture. The sea offers no moment of relief or escalation. In this environment, fatigue becomes another fixed element, like the engine's vibration or the muted glow of instruments, something always present, always accounted for. The commander remains alert to the subtle dangers of repetition. When effort becomes constant, vigilance can blur into assumption. To counter this, he introduces small acts of deliberate attention, a pause before acknowledgement, a brief return to a reading already checked, not to reopen uncertainty, but to prevent it from closing too completely. This is endurance stripped of drama. Fatigue does not threaten collapse. It threatens narrowing that goes unnoticed. And so command persists through awareness rather than resistance, adjusting continually to maintain clarity within constraint. The bridge holds. The convoy advances. And within this repeated, familiar fatigue, command continues, not waiting for relief, but functioning steadily inside a condition that has become as enduring as the war itself. Fatigue without collapse. Fatigue enters the bridge quietly, without announcement or disruption. It does not arrive as heaviness or confusion, but as a subtle change in texture, a softening of edges, a slight delay between perception and response. The commander recognizes it not as failure, but as a condition that must be managed like any other. The body adjusts first. Weight shifts more often from one foot to the other. Hands rest longer on familiar surfaces. Breathing deepens almost imperceptibly, drawing steadiness from rhythm rather than effort. These changes do not interfere with function. They support it. You observe how fatigue at this level avoids spectacle. There is no sagging posture, no visible strain. Instead, judgment becomes more conservative. Decisions, when required, favor stability over exploration. The commander chooses the known option more readily now, aware that novelty demands energy he must conserve. The bridge adapts alongside him. Movements grow even more economical. Checks are completed with practiced efficiency, no motion wasted. Conversation remains sparse, but precise. Fatigue is acknowledged collectively through refinement, not complaint. Outside, the sea continues its indifferent passage. Darkness holds without variation. The convoy advances through this sameness, each ship carrying its own fatigue, contained and disciplined. No single vessel appears to falter. The system absorbs the condition as it was designed to do. Fatigue does not diminish responsibility. If anything, it sharpens its weight. The commander understands that errors now would carry further than before, that recovery would require effort no longer easily available. And so he holds the line carefully, preserving clarity where it matters most, allowing nothing extraneous to intrude. The night continues, shaped now by endurance rather than readiness. Fatigue is present, but controlled. The bridge remains intact. Command persists, not despite weariness, but through its careful accommodation. As fatigue settles more firmly into the bridge, it reveals its deeper nature. It does not ask to be removed. It asks to be negotiated with. The commander feels this in the way attention must now be guided deliberately, nudged back into place rather than allowed to roam freely. Awareness remains intact, but it requires maintenance. The mind begins to favor patterns it already understands. Familiar readings feel reassuring. Anomalies are noted carefully, then checked twice before they are allowed to disturb equilibrium. This is not denial. It is triage. Energy is preserved for what cannot be ignored. You notice how command adjusts its expectations. Perfection is no longer pursued. Adequacy becomes the goal. Systems functioning within acceptable margins, decisions made cleanly, without unnecessary refinement. The bridge does not lower its standards. It redefines them to match what can be sustained. Outside, the convoy continues to move through darkness that no longer feels expansive, only repetitive. Distance accumulates without sensation. The sea offers no variation to reset attention or relieve strain. Everything remains uniform, and so fatigue deepens without sharp edges. The commander checks the clock again. Time has passed. though it does not feel like progress. Another watch change approaches. The structure holds. The burden of command remains constant, even as the resources to carry it thin slightly. Fatigue now shapes every choice, though it does not control them. It narrows the field, simplifies priorities, and reinforces reliance on routine. The bridge remains calm. The system holds. And within this sustained, managed weariness, command continues, steady, diminished only in range, never in responsibility. Decisions made in absence. Decision-making on the bridge rarely announces itself as such. There is no clear moment when thought resolves into action, no visible pivot that separates intention from execution. Choices emerge quietly, shaped by absence as much as by presence, by what is not known, not seen, not confirmed. The commander stands with this absence constantly. Information arrives incomplete by design. Contacts are uncertain. Reports describe conditions without revealing intent. Decisions must be formed anyway, using fragments that refuse to assemble into certainty. This is not improvisation. It is practiced restraint under constraint. You observe how choices here are conservative, almost reluctant, altering course, adjusting speed, reinforcing procedure. Each option is weighed not against what it might achieve, but against what it might disturb. Stability is favored not because it is safe, but because change introduces unknowns that fatigue has made expensive. The bridge absorbs these decisions without ceremony. Orders are issued softly, confirmed, and allowed to dissolve into routine. Nothing about them signals importance. They do not demand recognition. Their impact, if any, will be felt later, somewhere else, or not at all. Outside, the convoy continues its advance through darkness that offers no feedback. The sea does not respond to adjustment. The night does not register intent. Whatever consequences follow these choices will arrive delayed, filtered through distance and time. The commander understands this separation. Decision and outcome rarely meet on the bridge. Authority here operates without closure, issuing instructions that may never reveal their worth. And so each decision is made carefully, not to resolve uncertainty, but to prevent it from expanding beyond control. As decisions continue to be made without confirmation, their character becomes clearer. They are not steps toward resolution, but acts of containment. Each one limits the spread of uncertainty without eliminating it. The commander accepts this without frustration. Resolution is not an expectation here. The bridge reflects this understanding. Orders are brief, framed to adjust rather than transform. A slight alteration in spacing. A reminder passed along the formation. These actions are small enough to blend into routine, yet deliberate enough to reaffirm authority. Nothing dramatic is required to maintain control. You sense how fatigue influences this restraint. With diminished reserves, the commander avoids complexity. He chooses clarity over ambition, predictability over potential advantage. The war is not being shaped here. It is being held at bay, kept from pressing inward too sharply. Outside, the convoy advances unchanged in appearance. Darkness remains complete. The sea offers no sign that anything has been altered. Distance accumulates quietly, indifferent to the choices that govern it. The gap between decision and consequence remains wide, unbridgeable. The commander checks the instruments again, not expecting new information, but reaffirming continuity. The system holds. For now, that is enough. Decisions continue to be made in absence, guided by experience rather than certainty, carrying responsibility forward without promise of acknowledgement. The night does not conclude. The bridge remains active, restrained, and unresolved. And within this sustained uncertainty, command persists, steady, deliberate, and alone with the weight of choices that may never be answered. Loss without presence. Loss enters the bridge without sound. There is no impact, no shock carried through steel or air. It arrives instead as information, a brief report, a confirmation phrased carefully enough to avoid detail. A ship has fallen out of formation. Contact has been lost. The words are chosen to describe absence rather than destruction. The commander receives this without visible reaction. There is no time allotted for response beyond acknowledgement. The system does not pause. The convoy continues its movement, its shape altered slightly, almost imperceptibly. What has occurred is registered, then absorbed. You notice how distance transforms loss at this level. There are no faces attached, no voices, no immediate sensory evidence. The loss exists as a change in numbers, a gap on the chart, an adjustment in spacing. It is real, but abstracted, filtered through procedure before it can be felt. The bridge accommodates this information as it has everything else. Orders are adjusted quietly, bearings recalculated, continuity restored. Nothing in the environment reflects the magnitude of what has occurred. The lights remain dim. The engines continue their steady vibration. Outside, the sea offers no distinction between presence and absence. It closes over the place where something was, leaving no trace. Darkness remains complete. The convoy advances through it, altered but unbroken. The commander understands that this is how loss is encountered at command. Not as rupture, but as data. Not as grief, but as responsibility extended. The night does not acknowledge the change. And so the bridge carries on, holding loss without presence, continuing forward through a war that does not announce its costs in advance. As the information settles, its weight becomes apparent not through emotion, but through adjustment. The commander notes the altered formation, the recalculated distances, the slight thinning of the line that must now be maintained. Loss does not interrupt command, it extends it. Responsibility grows outward to fill the space that remains. There is no moment set aside for reflection. The bridge does not change its rhythm to accommodate what has happened. Reports continue. Watches rotate. Procedures hold. Loss is incorporated into the system the same way fatigue was, acknowledged, managed, and carried forward without display. You sense how this absorption reshapes the meaning of continuity. The convoy moves on not because the loss is insignificant, but because stopping would expose everything else to greater risk. Command here is measured by what is preserved, not by what is mourned. The system demands continuation. Outside, the sea remains indifferent, offering no marker of what has been taken. Darkness closes over the absence completely, leaving nothing to distinguish this stretch of water from any other. The war does not memorialize its own actions. It simply proceeds. The commander remains steady, though the calculus has shifted. Every decision now carries the knowledge that absence can arrive without warning, without sound, without presence. This knowledge does not paralyze him. It narrows his attention further, reinforces restraint, deepens caution where caution can still be exercised. Loss, at command, does not arrive as an ending. It arrives as a condition that must be sustained alongside all the others. The bridge holds it quietly, folding it into routine, into continuity, into the ongoing responsibility of keeping what remains intact. The night continues. The convoy advances. And within this extended impersonal carrying of absence, Command persists, not untouched by loss, but shaped by it, and required to move forward all the same. Loss that no longer interrupts. The second report of loss arrives without ceremony, folded into routine as if it were any other update. The words are precise, restrained, carefully chosen to describe absence rather than event. A vessel has failed to respond. Formation has adjusted. The convoy continues. The commander receives this information without visible reaction. There is no pause, no recalibration of posture, no change in tone. Loss, encountered again, no longer announces itself as disruption. It enters as condition, something to be carried alongside fatigue, repetition, and uncertainty. You notice how this alters the bridge's response. There is no moment of heightened alertness, no tightening of attention beyond what is already in place. Procedures absorb the information seamlessly. Bearings are updated. Spacing is corrected. Continuity reasserts itself without needing to be defended. Distance plays its role again. The loss is not witnessed. No sound carries across the water. No signal marks the moment of separation. What has occurred is known only through absence and report. The sea offers no differentiation, closing over what is gone with the same indifference it shows to what remains. Outside, the convoy advances through darkness that now feels familiar rather than threatening. The water holds no memory of previous loss, and does not distinguish between first and second. The environment remains unchanged, even as the system within it adjusts again. The commander senses the shift this time brings. Loss no longer demands acknowledgement. It demands accommodation. The mind notes the change, then returns to what must still be maintained. Responsibility does not deepen through emotion. It deepens through accumulation. The bridge remains steady. The night continues. And within this second encounter with absence, command persists, not shocked, not hardened, but increasingly shaped by the understanding that loss is no longer exceptional. It is now part of the background against which everything else must function. As the information settles, it leaves little disturbance behind. The bridge does not linger on what has been reported. There is no secondary confirmation sought beyond what procedure requires. Loss, encountered again, does not widen the field of attention. It fits cleanly into the narrowed space already shaped by fatigue and repetition. The commander notes the altered formation almost reflexively. A gap exists where one did not before, but it does not draw the eye for long. The mind registers it as adjustment rather than absence. Continuity has learned how to absorb this change without hesitation. You sense how this alters the moral texture of command. The first loss carried weight because it disrupted expectation. The second carries less surface weight, not because it matters less, but because expectation has already shifted. The system now assumes vulnerability as a constant rather than an exception. Outside, the sea remains indifferent. Darkness holds steady. Nothing in the environment reflects the difference between one loss and another. The water accepts both equally, erasing distinction the moment it is made. In this setting, repetition extends even to absence. The commander remains attentive to what this normalization costs. Loss that no longer interrupts can pass unnoticed if vigilance is not maintained. And so he returns, briefly, to the chart, to the instruments, to the shape of the convoy, not to dwell, but to confirm that accommodation has not slipped into neglect. The bridge continues its work without pause. Procedures hold. Fatigue persists. Loss now exists alongside them as a background condition, carried forward without ceremony. Command does not resolve this. It contains it. The night stretches on. The convoy advances. And within this quiet acceptance of repeated absence, command persists, shaped less by what has been taken than by the discipline required to continue without being undone by it. Absence becomes baseline. By the time the convoy settles into its adjusted shape, absence no longer announces itself at all. The mind accepts the new spacing without commentary. What once would have drawn attention now blends into expectation. The system has recalibrated, quietly and completely. The commander recognizes this shift with a kind of unease that does not surface as emotion. Absence has become predictable. Loss is no longer something that arrives. It is something that is assumed. This understanding does not dull responsibility. It changes its posture. Vigilance now operates with the knowledge that what is present may not remain so. You observe how this alters the way the bridge reads information. Reports are received with the same precision as before, but the context has shifted. Each confirmation of presence carries an unspoken qualifier. Each silence holds more weight than it once did. The system listens differently now, attuned as much to what fails to appear as to what does. Outside, the sea remains unchanged, its surface indifferent to the internal recalibration taking place above it. Darkness still absorbs distance without distinction. The convoy advances, its altered formation now treated as normal rather than provisional. What was once loss has been incorporated into the definition of intact. The commander stands within this new baseline, aware that command has crossed a threshold that cannot be reversed. There is no return to the earlier assumption of wholeness. From now on, continuity includes absence by default. Decisions are made with this in mind, even when it is not spoken. The bridge holds steady. Procedures continue. And within this quiet normalization of absence, command persists, not because loss has been resolved, but because it has been absorbed so thoroughly that it no longer interrupts the flow of responsibility. As absence settles fully into the background, it reshapes attention in ways that are difficult to isolate. The commander no longer distinguishes between a complete formation and an altered one. What matters now is coherence, that what remains continues to function as a system, regardless of what has been taken away. The bridge reflects this adjustment without discussion. No one looks twice at the new spacing. The altered rhythm of reports feels ordinary. Loss has ceased to be a moment that demands acknowledgement. It has become a parameter, quietly shaping every calculation without being named. You sense how this changes the emotional register without producing emotion. Concern does not sharpen. Anxiety does not rise. Instead, there is a steady compression, a tightening of expectations to fit what has already proven vulnerable. Command adapts by lowering the threshold of surprise rather than raising alarm. Outside, the sea continues its indifferent movement. Darkness no longer feels like concealment, only continuity. The water does not distinguish between ships that remain and ships that have vanished. It offers no contrast by which absence might stand out. Everything is carried forward equally. The commander remains attentive to the danger of normalization. When absence becomes baseline, it risks eroding care rather than sharpening it. To counter this, he introduces small, deliberate returns to awareness, not of what is gone, but of what remains. A brief confirmation, a momentary check, enough to prevent drift from becoming neglect. The bridge holds within this recalibrated state. Fatigue persists. Repetition continues. Loss no longer interrupts. All three now coexist as conditions that define the war from this vantage point. None dominates. None resolves. The convoy advances. The night endures. And within this steady, unremarked accommodation of absence, command persists, carrying forward a system that has learned how to continue even when what it carries grows lighter, thinner, and harder to protect. Continuation after absence. The bridge does not mark the loss with any visible change. Its surfaces remain the same. The instruments glow steadily. The quiet routines resume their familiar sequence. Continuation asserts itself not as a decision, but as an obligation that reappears the moment it is tested. The commander feels this obligation settle more firmly now. Loss has altered the balance, but it has not loosened the system's grip. If anything, continuity demands greater care. Each remaining ship carries increased significance, not because it is valued more, but because there are fewer of them. You observe how the bridge adjusts almost instinctively. Spacing is recalculated. Vigilance is redistributed. Attention lingers slightly longer on certain instruments, certain reports. These changes are small enough to pass unnoticed, yet deliberate enough to matter. Continuation absorbs loss by tightening itself. Outside, the convoy moves on through darkness that offers no reassurance. The sea remains unchanged, indifferent to what has occurred beneath its surface. Distance accumulates without comment. The war does not slow to acknowledge absence. It requires only that movement continue. The commander stands within this adjusted continuity, aware that command now carries a sharper edge. Every order assumes what has already been lost, and what may yet be lost again. There is no expectation that the pattern will stabilize permanently. Stability is provisional, maintained only through sustained effort. Fatigue persists, now joined by a quieter awareness. That endurance includes the capacity to proceed without closure. The bridge holds this awareness without articulation. The night stretches on, altered but unbroken, carrying command forward through a war that has begun to reveal its cost without explaining it. As the convoy continues, absence becomes part of the background rather than an event. The space where a ship once held position no longer draws attention. Formation settles into its new shape, and the mind adjusts accordingly. What was lost does not vanish from awareness, but it no longer interrupts it. The commander senses this shift without relief. Continuation after loss does not restore balance. It establishes a different one. Procedures resume with slightly altered emphasis. Certain checks are repeated more carefully. Others are trusted without repetition. The system adapts, not to prevent loss, but to survive alongside it. You notice how responsibility now feels distributed differently. Each remaining vessel carries more weight simply by remaining. Command becomes an exercise in preservation rather than anticipation. The future is not imagined in terms of arrival or success, but in terms of persistence through the next interval and the one after that. Outside, the sea offers no contrast. Darkness remains uniform, indifferent to both presence and absence. The convoy moves through it as it always has, its altered shape reflected nowhere but in charts and memory. Distance continues to accumulate without acknowledgement. The commander remains at his post, holding continuity in place with deliberate care. Loss has not ended the night. It has not resolved anything. It has merely joined the set of conditions that must now be carried forward, alongside fatigue, uncertainty, and restraint. The bridge stays steady. The convoy advances. And within this sustained continuation after absence, command persists, shaped not by what remains to be achieved, but by what must still be kept from failing. Continuity without assurance. By now, Continuity no longer feels like a strategy. It feels like inertia, not careless movement, but momentum sustained through discipline rather than belief. The bridge carries this forward quietly. There is no longer an expectation that continuity will protect what remains. There is only the requirement that it be maintained. The commander senses this shift in how decisions are framed. Earlier, continuity was defended because it preserved the whole. Now it is preserved because disruption would expose what is left to greater risk. The logic has inverted without announcement. Continuity no longer promises safety. It promises coherence. You notice how this reframing alters attention. Checks are still completed, but with a different emphasis. The question is no longer whether something is wrong, but whether it remains sufficiently aligned to continue. Adequacy replaces reassurance. Stability becomes provisional, measured in intervals rather than assumptions. Outside, the convoy advances through water that remains unreadable. Light has not yet returned in any meaningful way. Darkness persists, but it no longer feels like concealment. It feels like duration, a state that stretches without direction. The sea offers no sign that endurance is accomplishing anything beyond survival. The commander stands within this prolonged motion, aware that assurance has quietly withdrawn. What remains is obligation. Orders continue to be issued. Procedures continue to function. But the belief that continuity will eventually resolve into arrival has thinned. Continuation now exists for its own sake. The bridge holds this without reaction. Fatigue, repetition, and normalized absence coexist without hierarchy. None offers relief. None demands escalation. Together, they define a state that must be carried forward intact, even as its meaning becomes harder to articulate. The convoy moves on. The system holds. And within this continuity without assurance, command persists, no longer sustained by expectation, but by the discipline required to keep moving when expectation no longer applies. As continuity carries on in this altered state, it demands a different kind of attention. The commander no longer checks for confirmation that things are improving. He checks for alignment, that the remaining elements still move together, still respond within acceptable bounds. Assurance has withdrawn, but structure remains. The bridge reflects this shift quietly. Conversations shorten further, reduced to what must be exchanged to keep coherence intact. Reports are acknowledged without elaboration. The system speaks less because it assumes less. What is said is enough, and nothing more is expected. You sense how this condition reshapes the experience of time. Without assurance, there is no anticipation of resolution to lean toward. Hours are measured by persistence rather than progress. Each interval completed simply creates the obligation to complete the next. Continuity becomes recursive, feeding only itself. Outside, the sea remains unchanged, its surface offering no feedback to reward endurance. The convoy advances through this indifference, held together by procedure rather than confidence. Distance accumulates without promise. Survival continues without explanation. The commander remains attentive to the fragility of this state. Continuity without assurance can slide into automation if left unattended. To prevent this, he introduces small moments of deliberate presence, a pause before acknowledgement, a brief reconsideration of spacing, not to restore belief, but to ensure attention has not thinned too far. The bridge holds within this narrowed equilibrium. Fatigue persists as background. Repetition continues as labor. Absence remains normalized. None of these are resolved, and none are expected to be. Together, They form the condition that must now be sustained. The convoy moves on through darkness that no longer conceals, only endures. And within this continuation stripped of reassurance, command persists, steady, deliberate, and intact, not because it expects an end, but because stopping has ceased to be an option. Holding without belief. At some point, belief withdraws entirely. Not belief in the system's mechanics, those still function, but belief that endurance is leading somewhere definable. The commander becomes aware of this absence not as doubt, but as a quiet simplification. What remains is holding. The bridge adapts to this state without disturbance. Procedures continue because they must, not because they promise improvement. Orders are issued with the same clarity as before, yet they no longer carry expectation beyond compliance. The system operates on obligation alone. You notice how this alters the internal posture of command. Earlier, effort was sustained by the sense that continuity protected meaning. Now, meaning is no longer consulted. Attention is placed where it is required, withdrawn where it is not, and held steady without reference to outcome. This is not resignation. It is alignment with reality as it presents itself. Outside, the convoy advances through water that looks unchanged from hour to hour. The sea offers no signal that belief has left the bridge. Darkness persists, unresponsive and uniform. Distance continues to accumulate without explanation, as it has all along. The commander stands within this stripped condition, aware that holding without belief demands a different discipline. Without expectation, there is a temptation to loosen attention, to allow routine to operate unattended. He resists this not through renewed conviction, but through structure. Checks are completed because they are required. Spacing is maintained because coherence depends on it. Fatigue remains present, but it no longer argues for relief. Repetition continues, but it no longer comforts. Absence persists, but it no longer interrupts. All three have settled into a single, sustained state that must be carried without interpretation. The bridge holds. The convoy moves. And within this holding stripped of belief, command persists, not driven by hope, not sustained by assurance, but maintained through the quiet discipline of continuing when belief is no longer part of the equation. As holding becomes the dominant posture, it reveals its own demands. Without belief to soften effort, attention must be placed deliberately, again and again. The commander senses this not as strain, but as precision, the careful allocation of awareness to what remains essential and nowhere else. The bridge reflects this refinement. Movements are reduced to their necessary forms. No gesture is wasted. No word is offered that does not serve function. The space feels spare now, not because it has emptied, but because everything extraneous has been set aside. What remains is enough. You notice how time behaves differently here. Without belief to pull it forward, without expectation to mark its passing, hours lose distinction. They do not drag. They do not rush. They simply occur, one after another, each demanding the same measured response. Continuity persists without narrative. Outside, the sea continues its indifferent motion. Light begins to thin at the horizon, though it brings no sense of arrival. Daylight, when it comes, will not resolve what the night has carried. It will only make it visible in a different way. The convoy advances, unchanged in purpose, altered only by what has already been absorbed. The commander remains attentive to the danger hidden in this stripped condition. Holding without belief can become mechanical if awareness is allowed to fade. To prevent this, he introduces moments of intentional presence, not reflection, not hope, but attention sharpened briefly against routine. enough to keep the system alive as a living structure, not a machine left to run unattended. The bridge holds within this quiet discipline. Fatigue persists. Repetition continues. Absence remains baseline. None of these require interpretation now. They simply exist, carried forward through deliberate effort. The convoy moves on. The sea remains unchanged. And within this sustained holding without belief, command persists, steady, intact, and unresolved, maintaining coherence not because it expects meaning, but because coherence itself has become the task. Command without resolution. Morning does not arrive with certainty. Light returns gradually, diluted by cloud and mist, its presence felt before it is seen. The bridge registers the change almost reluctantly. Darkness loosens its hold, but does not release it entirely. The sea remains flat and unreadable, its surface offering no record of what has passed beneath it. The commander remains at his post, aware that the return of light does not bring clarity. Visibility improves only in narrow bands. Shapes emerge at the edge of perception, then dissolve again. The horizon appears, but it does not promise understanding. Whatever the night concealed, the morning does not reveal. You notice how command persists across this transition without adjustment. Procedures remain intact. Vigilance does not relax. The system treats daylight as another condition to be managed, not as relief. Loss does not become easier to carry in the light. Fatigue does not recede. Continuity demands the same discipline it required in darkness. The convoy becomes partially visible now, ships appearing as muted silhouettes at measured distances. Their presence confirms survival, not success. Gaps remain where vessels once held position. These absences are clearer in daylight, though no more explanatory. The sea offers no trace of what occurred. The commander observes this without expression. Resolution does not accompany survival. Arrival does not conclude responsibility. The war continues to exist as an ongoing condition, pressing forward regardless of hour or visibility. What has been endured does not transform into meaning on its own. The bridge remains steady. The morning settles into place without ceremony, and within this incomplete return of light, command continues, intact, restrained, and unresolved. As daylight establishes itself more fully, the bridge reveals nothing new. Surfaces regain their color. Instruments become easier to read. The sea stretches outward in muted tones of gray and blue, offering a sense of space without explanation. Visibility expands, but meaning does not. The commander notes the convoy's shape more clearly now. Ships hold their positions with familiar precision. The altered formation no longer draws attention. What remains has stabilized, not because it has healed, but because it has been required to continue. Command adjusts to this stability without relief. You sense how resolution remains absent by design. There is no signal that the night's endurance has earned rest, no acknowledgement that loss has been accounted for. The war does not close its loops. It leaves them open, carried forward into the next interval of responsibility. Reports resume their steady cadence, now describing conditions in daylight terms. Visibility ranges. Sea state. Nothing in the language reflects what has already occurred. The system speaks only to what is now, not to what has passed. Memory exists privately, not procedurally. The commander stands within this ongoing present, aware that command does not culminate in understanding. It culminates in continuation. Decisions made earlier remain unverified. Outcomes remain dispersed across time and distance. There is no moment set aside to gather them into coherence. The convoy advances under a sky that offers no answers. The sea remains indifferent. And within this extended absence of resolution, command persists, not awaiting conclusion, but carrying responsibility forward into a future that will resemble the past more than it will depart from it. Long after the convoy has passed beyond this stretch of water, the sea returns to its older rhythms. Wind moves across the surface without regard for formation or spacing. Waves rise and fall without remembering where ships once held their lines. Nothing in the water retains the shape of command. The bridge, too, belongs now to another moment. The instruments will be read again by other hands. Orders will be issued in different nights, under different skies. What occurred here does not linger as an event. It disperses into habit, into experience carried quietly forward. You stand outside the war now, looking back without standing inside it. From this distance, the Atlantic appears vast and calm, its surface unbroken by what once passed through it in darkness. The absence of trace is not concealment. It is simply the nature of water and of time. What remains of command is not victory or defeat, but endurance, the sustained holding of responsibility without expectation of closure. Decisions made in absence, losses absorbed without pause, nights carried forward through routine and restraint. These do not resolve into meaning on their own. They persist as conditions once lived inside, now recalled only in outline. The war ended on paper, in ports, in ceremonies and dates. But the state of command, waiting, narrowing, carrying on, does not end so cleanly. It lingers wherever responsibility outlasts clarity, wherever continuation is required without explanation. The sea continues its movement. Light shifts across its surface. Somewhere far from here, another watch is taken up, another system held together through quiet attention. And the Atlantic, unchanged and unmarked, carries none of it, except in the brief memory of those who stood at fixed points and endured what could not be seen. In the years that followed, the Atlantic returned fully to itself. Shipping lanes shifted. Harbors filled and emptied. New vessels crossed the same waters with different purposes, their movements unburdened by the conditions that once governed every mile. The sea did not change. Only the meaning placed upon it did. The commander's role dissolved quietly into history, not as a figure remembered, but as a function that ceased to be required. What remained was not a story of triumph, nor of failure, but of sustained attention, of responsibility carried through uncertainty without expectation of recognition. This is the part that leaves the least trace. You can look at the ocean now and see nothing of that endurance. Wind moves freely. Light scatters across the surface. The water reflects the sky without reservation. Yet beneath this calm lies a memory that does not announce itself, a period when continuation itself was the measure of success. The Atlantic War was not resolved in moments of clarity, but in stretches of restraint, in nights where nothing happened, and therefore everything had to be held, in commands issued without confirmation, losses absorbed without pause, and responsibility carried forward simply because it could not be set down. This is what remains when the noise recedes. Not an ending, but a recognition that history often unfolds not through decisive acts, but through long endurance, through people standing at fixed points, maintaining continuity while the world refuses explanation. The sea continues. The light shifts. And somewhere between memory and silence, the past still moves, not loudly, not visibly, but with the same quiet persistence it always required. You've been part of echoes of war, where stories rise on quiet wings, and the past still circles above us, refusing to land.